Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Murphy, the Customer Success Associate here at Ellevate Network, and I am your host for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this session of Mobilize Women Week, the changing face of business. Mobilize Women is a movement based on Ellevate Network's purpose of achieving equality for all. We work towards equality by giving diverse voices, and particularly those of women, a seat at the table where decisions are made. Today, we believe highlighting those voices, opinions, and stories is even more important than ever. For those of you not familiar with Ellevate, we're a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. We believe that no matter what your goals are, what your challenges you're facing, having people you can turn to is invaluable. Throughout this week-long experience, you'll have a chance to engage in candid discussions with some of today's most thought-provoking leaders. Then, through our signature events, you'll have a chance to meet and develop relationships with other people who, like you, want to use their power for influence and equality. Today, Mobilize Women is no exception. During today's session, we'll be joined by incredible speakers, and there will be time for them to answer your questions at the end. First, a few housekeeping tips. Please use the chat to engage with others and our amazing speakers. Also, post your questions in the Q&A box for our moderator to see and click the closed captions icon to toggle them on. If need be, you can privately message the Ellevate team. We are identifiable as the host and co-host of the session, and we have Ellevate in our names. Recording of the session will be posted on the Ellevate site for our members to view as an evergreen resource. Did you know you can become a free member today? Head on over to ellevatenetwork.com. And last but not least, please go to mobilizewomen2020.com to have the true Mobilize Women experience. We're big, we're global, but we're always in this together. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we are going to have Sandra and Kristen go first to start us off.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. How is everyone? Hi, Sandra. How are you?
I'm great.
So I'm so excited to talk to you because I'm so impressed with your career. I should just point out, because I know you will not toot your own horn, so I'm going to do it for you. One of the top 100 Latino leaders, and that was by Latino Leaders magazine. So congratulations on that. And you've just had
Thank you.
Such a great career in the fashion industry, and most recently, the former CEO of DVF, which of course everyone knows, that single wrap dress, right? It transformed the fashion world.
Yes, it did. That's for sure. For 45 years.
So let's talk a little bit about your time there. You know, you left right as the pandemic hit. It went to bare bones. Talk about what happened, and talk about, you know, what could have been done differently, do you think, or was it just a matter of circumstance?
Well, I think this is it's a conversation as it relates to learning, because no matter what you do and where you are, it's good either to learn from your own mistakes, your own scenarios and situations and circumstances, or from somebody else experiencing different things. And so for that, thank you for asking the question. I think it is, number one, obviously, COVID has impacted retail in general. It's impacted fashion in significant ways because we're all sitting at home and we don't have the need for a $500 dress, because where are we going in that today? But certainly what has happened in terms of the business that I was leading before, it is a business that had made a lot of changes over the last 8 to 10 years. And those changes had kind of caught up to the company. And my role was to come in and turn around the business. And we were turning around the business, but businesses take some time to turn around, especially in fashion, and we weren't quite there fully as it relates to turning it around. So ultimately what happened, in terms of the COVID and the pandemic situation, was that stores had to close, business model had to be revisited. I will tell you that Diana Furstenberg herself, who's extremely modern in her thinking and always very innovative, knew that there was and focus that needed to be had on D2C and the customer and making sure that we were more digital, and also knew that fashion was kind of out of step with what was happening with the modern consumer base. So
is in our room is true. But
company. Go ahead, Sandra. We can.
So yeah, so with that, you know, she had been looking for what was the next move, what was the next right business model, because we're in 2020. Obviously, the pandemic was a situation that forced us all to take a look at our business and say, what are we here for? What's the future hold? And the business model for DVF itself needed to change again. You know, it's been a private family business for 45 years, and it's her legacy. And, you know, it's an amazing heritage brand. She's an amazing, iconic woman. Obviously, the brand will not go away. She will continue to be incredible at helping women and inspiring confidence. She'll be incredible and continue to do, you know, great things as far as the business goes, but it just needed to really be drastically reduced to be able to reset and to determine at that point, what is the future after it is reset? You know, what type of business model, what are the partnerships? We had a very complicated business and a complex structure with a global business and a lot of stores around the world as well, and different distribution partnerships. So, so that business, I have no doubt, will continue. She will continue to be incredible and inspiring for so many people, not only women, but so many people in general. So I would say in terms of, you know, one of the questions, or the one part of the question as it relates to what could have been done differently, as in everything, and I think we're all looking at this now much more microscopically, is it's all about cash flow, and it's all about making sure that no matter what and no matter how hard the decisions are, because it impacts people, you know, going into a situation to do a turnaround in a company, it does impact people, because you're generally looking to right size the operating expenses, and that generally means really looking at the people and how many, what the actual impact is of people in the organization, and how, what you actually need, what you can manage, and also the business model itself, and kind of making changes. So what could have been done differently is certainly doing some things earlier that would have impacted people and impacted certain business structures, but doing them earlier to be able to save and reduce the operating expenses even further. And obviously being much more focused on cash flow and making, you know, because they're all of a sudden you had COVID and there was no 6 months from now.
Yeah, I mean, everything just happened so suddenly, and so many business sort of got caught, I guess. You've turned so many brands around. You've been such a mentor to so many businesses and business owners. Talk a little bit about what you try to relay to them in terms of the core, knowing the core of the brand, the core of the business.
Well, even, you know, coming into my last round with DVF, it was really about going back and identifying, what is the brand about? What was it to begin with? Why did it exist? What's the purpose? What's the point of differentiation? And it's looking at that, you know, for every single brand. Who's the customer? Who's the audience? What difference does it make? You know, how does it stand out and separate itself? What is the DNA, and how can that be consistent? And, you know, consistency is something I talk about a lot, because there's a lot of times and a lot of examples in fashion where you can see brands that have changed and they've decided to become somebody else, or they've tried to sway with the consumer behavior. And as soon as the consumer started changing, then they started changing too. But inevitably, you still have to be yourself. You still have to have that DNA that has existed. You can always rebrand, you can modernize, but you still have to have that core DNA and the purpose and the mission that you have as a brand for the consumer. So that is the very first thing, and it's probably one of the most important things that you can do in my mind, is going back and really reevaluating what a brand exists for and what that point of differentiation is, and then really trying to stay very consistent with that from every single consumer touch point. Something that we were doing as well in terms of what's the mission, what's the purpose. Okay, well, at DVF, it's about empowering women and inspiring confidence. And that doesn't necessarily mean all about selling product, but it's everything, the partnerships that we had with female founded businesses and brands, the ability to be able to have events where they were focused on women's panels and a lot of discussions and providing knowledge and sharing across a multitude of different channels and distribution channels. And, you know, that was really exciting because we were really making an impact, and she's obviously made an impact for a long time. But I think that was really one of the reasons that I went to DBF, was because after so many years in the business and really working with brands that had a name on a label, it was refreshing to be able to lead a brand that had a heritage, had a purpose, and to be able to tie and connect that purpose back to everything that we did, from the product in the beginning to the messaging at the end to the consumer. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into that. Obviously, there's a lot of complications as you start from product and you end up with messaging and delivering product to the customer and making sure that you have satisfied customers. But those are the key core components, I think, when you go back and look at a brand, and kind of making sure that it's relevant again, and you know, just staying true to the core.
And DDF has been, you were talking about how the women empowerment plays into there, and it really this motto that you couldn't give gender the power to place limits on your potential, that fear really wasn't an option here.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, Kristen? I couldn't hear you.
Where the brand itself, there was this belief that you couldn't give gender the potential to place a limit, I guess, on your potential, the power to place a limit on your potential. It was sort of, we can do all things, which I think is very empowering for women. And particularly when you're running a company and you're dealing with so many facets, as you said.
Yeah, well, you know, Diane would say herself many, many times is that she became confident because of one dress, and that inspired her to be able to be more confident for more women. And confidence is such a key word that we all underestimate. You know, it takes time and commitment and belief in yourself to be able to have confidence. But if you have the confidence and you just force yourself to be confident, there's so many things that can come from that, and you can do so much more. You know, listen, we've all been through so many different scenarios that I'm sure we're not confident in, you know, a given meeting or a given discussion, or so-and-so is better than us or has a better education or whatever else. But, you know, confidence is key. There's only one person, there's only one you, and we all kind of underestimate the value that we have and the lessons that we have learned and what we've been able to do. And I think women are not great at patting themselves on the back. We're not great self-promoters, but it's about trying to make sure that we are doing that more, that we are lifting each other up. And that's why, you know, even having these partnerships with female founded businesses and brands, like, let's lift them up, because if they're successful, we're all successful. And that's really what I've been trying to do on a personal level and on a career basis, and also obviously what the brand was doing.
And, you know, I want to get to some other questions about the business, but just pivoting off that, you were talking about we have to lift each other up. You say you're inspired by your children. You have 3 children. You raise them largely on your own. And you said your older daughter's in college now, and you're really impressed with the way she's embraced her heritage and really is, she said, this is a generation that's going to make a difference. And I agree with you. I think, you know, each generation gets a little bit more confident and a little bit more sure of themselves.
It's true. And this generation, this Gen Z, is incredible. I mean, they are absolutely couldn't be stronger as it relates to the issues and being activists and really making an impact and making a difference. And I see it and I hear it within all 3 of my kids, who are right in that Gen Z age demographic. But going back to the Latina aspect of it, I am first generation. I grew up with 2 immigrant parents. They were both from Mexico, and I grew up in Texas at a time where I believed, anyway, in my perspective living it, was that I wanted them to be very quiet. I didn't want to hear them speaking Spanish, and certainly not in public. So I kind of shied away from it because I didn't want to be seen as that, because there was a lot of labeling around and a lot of racial bias when I was there.
Bias. So it's sort of what you grow up with, right? That's how you react.
Right. But my kids, when my oldest daughter and my kids have all attended private school in Manhattan, and I think, you know, when you have a certain level of privilege as well, because you're attending these great schools and you're getting this education and you're really being able to open your mind. They've been very open. And my oldest daughter started getting very involved in Latina type of initiatives. And I realized that she feels more Latina than I do. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened here? How did this miss? So I've started listening to her and, how passionate she is about things. And then I started waking up and saying, well, wait a minute, I've missed a lot along the way, because I tried to keep that in the back of my mind, or kind of like, yes, it's part of me, but it wasn't like I wasn't embracing it. Certainly wasn't embracing it because I also didn't have that community that I was a part of, either growing up in Texas or even the first part of New York and being here for a career. So now over the past 5 years that I have been unbelievably overwhelmed by the amount of Latinas and Latinos who have just been with open arms, who have been so successful, who have been so inspiring, who have done incredible things that are social impact, social causes, professional, entrepreneurial, like all of it. It's just been it's been so amazing to see. And I'm like, where have you been all my life? So for me now, it's like, okay, I didn't have the option of seeing somebody that I always knew I wanted to be a CEO and running a business. I always knew that. So I didn't see anyone that I thought looked like me or had my type of background. And now if the more people share their stories, and it's kind of getting myself out of my own comfort zone to be able to have these conversations, because I never talked about it before. But as I talk about it, I realize like it's my duty to talk about it so that the next generation can also say, oh, hey, that's me too, and I can do that. I'm one of 6 kids. I'm the only one that didn't go to an Ivy League school. And I didn't get a master's or a law degree, and I have a judge and lawyer and siblings that, PhD, et cetera. And I was able to do what I did. So, and here I am. So I think it's really, I'm duty bound right now to help other Latinas, especially Latinas, because obviously we're all focused in terms of helping to uplift women, but Latinos in general.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of your mentoring in a little bit. But first, I just want to go back to DVF for a moment, because you really wanted to increase the sustainability. And one of the big things was to go fur free. And it was because you were listening to your customers. And you were talking about knowing the core of your business before, but also listening to your customers and knowing what they want to, and then kind of working off that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I firmly believe in, and it's kind of gone back to that and come back full circle in terms of the business, but I grew up in the industry at a time when it was all about the consumer, and there were a lot of stores, and we were traveling to the stores all the time, and I could see the customer and hear the customer and speak to the customer. So I'm still very focused on the customer, and absolutely you have to listen to the audience, and you need to listen to what's going on and pay attention to what's going on in culture. It's one of the things also, because I've had corporate experience as well as entrepreneurial experience. And as an entrepreneur, I actually learned a lot from one of the individuals. I had a business partner, Tony Malolo. He and I created a business with Selena Gomez, and she was 15 at the time. But I actually really learned so much from her about the authenticity and about listening to your fan base and the audience and really doing what is right for them, because you're there because of them. And I think that's true in terms of fashion and brands and retail. Like you're there because of your consumers. So you need to listen to your consumers. It's the utmost importance. So, as it relates to sustainability and the other initiatives, there's a lot on a plate right now for a CEO in fashion. There's, as I said before, it's a very complex business in general, but there's a lot on the plate, new business models, whether it's rental, whether it's, resale, it's sustainability, and sustainability comes in so many different forms, from product fabrication, your supply chain, to logistics and last mile and transportation, et cetera. So there's a lot that's in there. And yes, we were focusing on all of them. We were doing a lot, and we were actually really kind of putting the accelerator on digital and putting the accelerator on making some changes to be able to be more sustainable and to be more modern.
Yeah, and COVID was just this, once in a generation thing, or once in a century thing that we're dealing with this pandemic, but it impacted your business in other industries, and you really realized that other companies have to learn how to pivot as well. And as we were talking about, you're a mentor to so many. So talk about what that does in terms of driving. How do you help them with their education, the positive changes and just dealing with something like this that really is unprecedented?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't think anyone has a crystal ball, and we certainly didn't have a roadmap for this pandemic. You know, no one gave you a plan to say, here you go, here's what you do. The one thing is, and I'm sure we'll hear this as well from Neil later, but it's so many companies and organizations were able to pivot very quickly to digital and really had to focus on where the customer is and where your audience is, whether it's you're a services oriented organization or you're a product company. And you know, you need to really realize where your customer is and what's most important to your customer. So right now, what are we all looking at? We're all looking at our homes. So how do you incorporate that into part of your world and part of your brand? So for us at DBF, because we were about the woman in charge, it's about in charge at home. You know, for another brand, it's also like, how do you do that at home, and how do you incorporate all the things that are most important to your audience while they're at home, whether it's a he or she, and you know, or any other element of what goes on around your home life. And I think that's the most important thing, is just listening to your customer and making sure that you know and acknowledge and are sensitive to what's going on right now. You know, because we all have a lot of issues to work through, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, it is going to take a long time. And, you know, there's been so much talk about the fashion industry, obviously, so hard hit, the supply chains and all that that you were talking about. Where do you see the fashion industry in, say, a year from now? How do you think it's going to look a year or two, if you can even predict?
Well, you know, we have these conversations a lot, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to hear other people's perspectives from around the world. But I think it's different globally. It's different in different parts of the world. So from a domestic US standpoint, I think it's going to be much longer than a year before we actually get back up. You know, we have 100,000 stores that are closing in a 10-year time period in this country.
Wow.
That's staggering, you know, and it's extraordinarily impactful on so many levels, human capital and everything else. So we really have a long way to go to be able to really make up for that. Now, granted, we were oversaturated in stores, too many malls right across from each other, et cetera. But it still takes a toll, and it's still a really big impact. So we're going to feel that impact for a while. I think that, you know, the businesses that are going to continue to be strong, you know, I've seen, and we've all seen a record number of bankruptcies, a record number of job losses. And now it's about, okay, so what do we do next, and how do we pivot, which is, you know, part of what I'm working on now and next for the industry and for people, because I really see that there's this void now where not only has there been a void in the past, but there's a really big void right now for continuing education and allowing people to really learn and have access to knowledge so that they can actually try to pivot. And whether that's individually through different jobs, or whether it's a company in terms of acceleration, or how they pivot with a new customer base, or any number of different things.
I want to thank you so much for the conversation. You're incredible, obviously, and
Oh, thank you.
a short amount of time, and I have so many other questions I could ask you, but we're going to head over to.
We'll talk separately.
Yes, I love that. I absolutely would love that. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now we'll move over to Neil Blumenthal, co-founder and co-CEO of Warby Parker.
Hi, Neil. How are you? Can you hear us, Neil?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're so excited to talk to you as well. You've had such success, obviously. I don't need to tell you that, but in 10 years, basically, since you've launched, you have this billion-dollar company, and it came to you when you were in grad school. Three of your friends, you were headed to school. I think one of them broke a pair of glasses, and that wasn't you, right? Somebody broke a pair of glasses and realized how much it would cost to replace it.
Yeah, that was my co-founder and good friend, Dave Gilboa. Right before we started our MBA programs at Wharton, he was traveling and he left a $700 pair of glasses in the seat pocket of the airplane. And now being a full-time student and not earning an income, right, he couldn't fathom spending that much. Now he had worked in finance before, so that's why he could afford a $700 pair. But we got to talking along with our two other good friends, Jeff and Andy. And prior to business school, I had run a nonprofit social enterprise that would train low-income women in parts of rural India and Bangladesh and parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America to start their own businesses, giving vision screenings and selling glasses in their communities. And I had visited factories where glasses were made, and it was clear that the cost to produce glasses didn't justify the very high prices that, for example, Dave was paying for the $700 glasses.
It's interesting how you got to your price point, and just everything you were trying to do was different. There hadn't been an eyeglass company that had home try-ons, these low prices, this strong social mission. So talk about trying to get people on board with that, because a lot of your classmates even thought, this is never going to fly.
Yeah. So one of our very good friends who went on to start Allbirds, he had entered a business plan competition with us and we lost, but he won not for the Allbirds business plan, but for this like stuffed animal robot toy. And to this day, we have a chip on our shoulder from that. But the basically, it all comes down to what Sandra was saying, which is you have to know your customer and you have to speak to them, but you also have to be really sophisticated in how you gather information from them so that way you can make informed decisions around product, around pricing, around marketing, around your sales channels. And when I say sophisticated, maybe that's overstating it. You have to conduct surveys and have focus groups and really organize those insights and pull them out. And one of the things that we were doing as graduate students was asking our friends, hey, would you buy glasses online? Because for us, selling glasses online allowed us to have a direct relationship with our customers, so we could sell the glasses for far less because we were cutting out the middleman, right? We didn't have to wholesale the glasses to a retailer who would then mark them up and sell it to customers. And the feedback we kept getting from our customers, or potential customers, I should say, was, hey, I don't know if I would buy glasses online. I want to touch them, I want to feel them, I want to try them on. And that gave us the insight that, hey, how do we solve this? Oh, what if we ship people 5 pairs of glasses to try them on? And that was our home try-on program, and that really helped us launch with a big bang.
Well, I told you it's very popular in my household. So let's talk a little bit about being a force for good. And while you're talking about that, the decision to do that, to have this social mission, and also just most recently made that $1 million pledge to Black Lives Matter. So you were one of the first companies on board, just talking about that there needs to be a social component of this and how that helps with your customer relations.
Sure. Well, it really was a personal decision early on where Dave, Jeff, Andy, and I wanted to build a company that we were excited to come to work every day, that we weren't going to roll over and hit the snooze button. And yes, selling glasses is a public good. People need glasses to see. But also what motivates us is to build a company that can scale, that can be profitable, that can do good in the world and not charge a premium for it. And if we can do this, maybe we can influence other entrepreneurs and executives to run their businesses in a similar manner. So right from the get-go, we committed to provide a pair of glasses for every pair that we sold. And, you know, I think if we were raising capital right at the beginning, you know, people may have sort of questioned, is that a good idea? Like, that's going to shrink your margins. You know, how are you going to be profitable? But thankfully, we didn't raise capital actually until we had already launched and had some proof of concept. But what's interesting is that we've had no pushback from our investors. Now, granted, again, we've had some success here, but the way that we explain it is, hey, we know our customer cares about this, but we're also under no illusion that they don't care about this so much that they'll buy a crappy product at a high price, right? What our customers care generally, first and foremost, how does this pair of glasses look on my face? How much does it cost? What's the quality and service? And lastly, the social aspect to it. Now, what we have found is that for the same reason why we were motivated to build Warby Parker to do good in the world is the same reason why people want to come and work for Warby Parker. So it's the number one reason why people come and work. It's how we recruit. It's how we retain. Right, during it guides us also when we're in a time of crisis, when we are facing a pandemic. And the question is, in, for example, the middle of March, when we didn't have access to good information, testing was non-existent in the US pretty much. We knew that there was this tsunami of cases coming because we could see what was happening in Europe. And it seemed like the right thing to do was to close our stores for the health and safety of our customers and for the health and safety of our employees. And we made that decision on Friday, March 13th. We were one of the first national retailers to close. And then as we've gotten more information, then we've been able to open our stores in a safe manner. But again, that ethos is just, how do you want to run your company? Do you want to do it in a way steeped in values and integrity or not?
And I think that probably, as you said, it makes people want to work for you as well. So you shut down very early. You shut down before some cities did. And then you started reopening in June, and then you fully reopened just a short time ago. Talk about the decision-making that goes into that and the precautions that you take. How do you make your employees feel like you're taking every precaution? There's so many things to think about, I would imagine, as a business owner.
Definitely. Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that your number one role as a leader is to protect your followers, right? Which is your team. And how do you, protect and provide a health and safe environment during a pandemic, right? When the last one was 100 years ago. And so first thing that you do is you start talking to people and learning as much as possible. And we spent time talking to different businesses, particularly those in Asia and Europe that were going through it. And then how do you find experts, right? I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm not a public health expert. So we engaged a few folks that could consult with us, that could help us understand, hey, what data should we be looking at to make decisions on when to close, how to reopen, what protocols should we have, whether it's around mask wearing, whether it's also really understanding how this virus is transmitted, and also providing that information, not just to senior leadership, but to the entire company. So that way our team members could make smart decisions, not just in our offices or our factories or our stores, but at home, right? Because we want to protect people in all of their experiences. So, just as we were surveying and trying to learn a lot about our potential customers when we're working on our business plan, we take that same approach when we're in a new situation like a pandemic. How do we speak to as many people as possible to find out what the best strategy is going forward?
And talk a little bit about going forward. Obviously, you're always seem to be on the cutting edge in terms of in 10 years, you've built this billion-dollar company. I know you started in 2008, but in 2010 launching and you're already here. But what do you see for the future, particularly when you're dealing with the pandemic? How do you work around that? And what are you thinking about? And what should other business leaders be thinking about? Because you seem to have, you're at the forefront here.
I think a few different things. Obviously, depends on your category, but what does this new reality mean for your business? So if you're a retailer, for example, you now have to live in a world that is going to have social distancing. So your stores can't be as busy as they once were because you have to limit traffic. Now, those customers tend to have higher intent, so they may convert higher and be more likely to buy when they enter the store. But the point is that you're going to be operating in an environment that has reduced sales for quite a long period, right? Probably 12 to 18 months. So what can you do in that new reality? If you're opening up new stores, then it means you need to pay lower rent. It means you need to spend less on build outs. Maybe you're trying to get more concessions from landlords. So how do you try and learn as much as possible to reduce the uncertainty. Uncertainty is the enemy of every business, and the pandemic created so much uncertainty. But now as we've reopened stores, we start to learn, hey, what are sales volumes, right, in this new reality? Similarly, right, how do you deal with the human aspect of this, the stress and anxiety of a pandemic, of us all, being in some degree of quarantine, right? Human beings are naturally social beings, and to not interact with other folks as frequently as we did sort of pre-COVID takes a toll. So how can we engage and support one another, whether it's through video conferencing, and also recognizing what are some of the drawbacks of video conferencing. So I even spoke to some experts that say, hey, the reason why you're exhausted after 8 hours of Zoom calls is because there's cognitive load, because there's a slight delay from the audio that you hear and the visual and the video that you see. So maybe we should use video conferencing for some meetings, but not for all. So it's just learning and adjusting and pivoting.
And talk about in terms of stores, because you've opened up so many stores, you started out online. So what percentage of the business is what now, and where do you see that going? Do you think you'll be more online, because you were talking about the footprint, because so much space now and people not going into the stores as much?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, a majority of our business had shifted into stores because pre-COVID we had 120 stores. We've actually have opened a few stores over the last few months. But because of reduced sales volumes out of our stores, now e-commerce is the majority of our business. And at the end of the day, we like to say we're experience focused, but medium agnostic. So I don't care if our customers purchase from us in store or online, as long as they purchase from us. And our job is to make as seamless customer shopping experience as possible, so that way they do indeed shop with us.
And talk about, just in terms of leading, where you were 10 years ago compared to now. How have you changed personally as a leader?
I guess the biggest thing is you have to learn how to lead through other leaders, right? When you're at a business that has, less than 50 people, right? You can have an intimate, right, relationship with all of those 50 people and speak to them directly. And when you're doing all hands, you can have long Q&As, but then you start to get over 125 people, and suddenly you have a couple of layers within the company, and maybe you know everybody, but you don't know everybody well. You get to 500 plus, and now right, you need more formal channels of communication, and need to be really hiring great leaders and then communicating through them. And that's something that I've had to learn over the last 10 years. We now have roughly 3,000 people across very different areas of the business, from retail to merchandising, to technology, to our optical lab where we cut lenses and insert them into frames, to obviously our store teams.
And talk about the growth that's available at your shop. If someone knows nothing about eyeglasses, because a lot of your partners didn't really know anything about business, you had worked at the nonprofit, so you had a knowledge about what was going on. Can people move up throughout the company? Do you find there's a lot of internal promotion? And also, just because diversity is such a big issue now, and with women trying to get into the boardrooms and diversify the top of corporations, how much emphasis is placed there?
Quite a bit. So, I think part of what made us successful to start is that none of us had a true optical background, right? So we approached this with a beginner's mindset, and had no sacred cows, right? It was just about learning and how do we maintain that curiosity, but build it into the culture of Warby Parker. So we've built pretty robust learning and development programs where if you come into our stores, for example, and work at one of our stores, you could join one of our optician apprentice programs. We have programs in place as well that we've been refining and investing in more in, especially over the last few months, on if you might be interested in switching careers to work in product management or software development, particularly as we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? We operate in two industries, the optometry field and the tech sector, that is notoriously sort of not diverse. So how can we use some of our learning and development programs to add diversity to those fields? And we can do that internally at Warby Parker, model that behavior for other companies as well. When we look at diversity at Warby Parker, we have done a better job on gender diversity, for example, than looking at diversity by race and ethnicity. So half of our executive team is female or non-binary, and we're now doing a lot more work on how we can have more racial and ethnic equity at Warby.
Yeah, I mean, these are just conversations that we are having around the country now because of George Floyd and all that has come since then. With the protests, it's opened up a lot of people's eyes. Talk about some of the hard conversations you've had among the executives or even your staff who have come to you and said, these are issues we want to address. Can you address them as a company? Or maybe there are issues that you don't want to touch as a company.
Yeah, I don't know if there used to be this perception that, oh, businesses can just focus on business. It's like, no, businesses are members of the community and they have their own community as well. And as external events affect that community, right, businesses and business leaders have a role to play. And, I was having a conversation with some of our teammates. This was in particular a store manager, and she was a person of color, and described how one of our Wi-Fi vendors come into the store and walk right by her and approach a younger white male employee, thinking that he was the store manager. And those types of microaggressions, right, are devastating to individuals. Also have business impact, right? I want my store managers and business leaders throughout the company to not have to struggle with systemic racism. And so we're going to fight it. And what's a tangible thing we can do in that situation is take a look at our vendor code of conduct and talk to our vendors and say, hey, we want you to provide microaggression training. We don't want these types of incidences to happen. If you want to be a vendor for Warby Parker, then you have to agree to that.
That's an interesting point, because there are vendors who do want to do business with you, but it will depend on their behavior. And how are you able to do that? Do you encourage your staff members to come to you and bring these incidents to you? And what would you recommend to just people who are employees at everyday companies, and how do they deal with a situation like that where they're not being treated with the respect that they think they deserve?
Yeah, well, every business should have a lot of formal communication channels, right? Speaking to your boss, speaking to HR or the people team. Lots of businesses like Warby Parker also have anonymous hotlines that you can report. This is to these anonymous hotlines are to help prevent fraud, but also to uncover, incidences of malfeasance that could relate to racism, could relate to sexism, or anything. So it's important to speak up. And also, as a business leader, I want to make sure that bad news travels fast and that these types of things get escalated, because sometimes they can get caught in middle management where maybe there isn't action taken as quickly as what's needed.
And we only have a couple more minutes left, but I wanted to talk about your big picture. Just if you're dreaming big, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? I know we talked about a year or whatever with the pandemic, but just where do you think Warby Parker can get to, and what are some of the dreams, if you don't mind sharing them?
Sure. Well, we hope to continue to transform the optical industry. You know, when we started, we were focused on one type of frame with one type of prescription lenses. That has expanded to a much wider assortment and serving all different types of people with their glasses needs, but also sunglasses, contact lenses. There's now we offer sort of what we call vision services. So you get eye exams with us. You can download the Warby Parker Prescription Check app and do a vision test remotely in order to renew your prescription. So I think you'll see us continue to play more in the vision care and healthcare front.
And I think we have time for one more, but I'm going to go to just a question that came in. It just talks about, companies there are some companies who are doing very well right now at a time when, so many people are financially strapped. So you have that give back component, but talk about just kind of that difference that we're seeing in society throughout. The stock market is flying, and then you've got people who can't put food on the table. As a business owner, how do you deal with that?
Inequality is not good for anyone. It's not good for the country, and it's not good for business. So I think that it's important that we acknowledge how much inequality has risen over the last 40 years in particular. If you look, it really goes back to some changes in the tax code, and people need to make sure that their voice is heard. We have an election coming up. We have a challenging situation with respect to voting this year because of a pandemic where individuals may be afraid to vote in person. Have we done all the things that we need to enable early voting or vote by mail? I think that businesses have a role to play here. And one of the things that Warby Parker is doing is providing paid time off to ensure that people don't have to choose between a paycheck and voting. We're providing information across all the states in which we operate, so our employees know when are their deadlines to register, when are their deadlines for early voting, to apply for an absentee ballot, and the like. And it's actually part of our onboarding process. When you join Warby Parker, we encourage you to register to vote. So I think that business has a role to play in civic engagement, and we all need to participate in our great democracy.
Yeah, it really sounds like you built not just a business, but a community there. And I think it will leave with this, but one of the comments that came in over the chat was that Warby Parker seems to be talking the talk and walking the walk, which I think for you, 10 years in, that has to be a really nice compliment.
It definitely is. Thank you.
Neil, we want to thank you so much. I could talk to you forever, but we appreciate it. Good luck with the business and the openings, and hopefully you won't have to close and back open again, but we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, Neil, and Kristen, for these amazing conversations. Now we'd like to please welcome Sally Krawcheck, Chair of Ellevate Network and co-founder and co-CEO of Ellevate.
Can you hear me? So, Kristen, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. Okay. And I know I'm sitting sort of in the I'm sitting in the semi-dark. It looks very mysterious here, but rather than get up and adjust the light, I will just forge on. It was so great to see Neil. These are, in fact, my Warby Parker glasses that I'm very happily wearing. And have enjoyed them, and have really loved watching all of Warby Parker's success, and I'm looking forward to so much success going forward. Sorry we had some technical glitches earlier. It is, it just is. So I'm just glad to be able to be here with all of you, and I'm half a glass of wine in, so I think it's really time to, just get very frank and very honest with everyone. I don't know about y'all. I'm having some good days and some tougher days. And actually today was one of the tougher days. I walked around all day with just this pit in my stomach. Even though, I've built a career on Wall Street, even though the stock market is higher and the economic outlook is strengthening. I spend days, as so many of you do, so worried about where we have gone and are going as a country. And I spend a lot of time concerned about women and what, us, and how women are farther back than I think we've acknowledged. I'll get to that point in a second. And I worry and fret and am sad that we aren't farther forward as my daughters come into the workforce, my nieces are coming into the workforce, that if you had told me when I was coming into the workforce that we wouldn't have made more progress, yeah, we've made progress, but wouldn't have made more progress, wouldn't in 2020 be to fully equal, I just wouldn't have believed you. And I want to take our attention, and I want to, for a couple of minutes, shift it from where it typically is. We in this country have had and are having, and at Ellevate Network have, a robust and vibrant and ongoing discussion about how do we close these gender pay gaps? How do we move ourselves forward? How do we help other women move forward? 82 cents to a man's dollar, decades away from closing for white women, 100 plus years for Black women, 200 plus years for Latinx women. We got to close this thing. I would actually argue that that is an important thing to focus on, but it is not the only thing we should be focusing on as we think about economic equality and we think about where to turn our attention from here. Because in fact, the gender pay gap, that 82 cents to a man's dollar, is, I would argue, not as important as the gender wealth gap. The gender wealth gap. So the pay gap is what you earn. The wealth gap is what you keep. The pay gap, I was actually looking today, if you Google for gender pay gap, you get 7.6 million results. If you Google for gender wealth gap, you get 51,000. So many fewer times the number of citations. And so the gender pay gap, what you earn, the gender wealth gap, what you keep. And of course, what's more important, what's coming in or what you have, what that cushion is at the end of the day. The gender wealth gap is 32 cents to a man's dollar. And while the gender pay gap has been slowly moving in the right direction, the gender wealth gap has actually been going backwards. And for Black women and for brown women, it is one single friggin' penny. It is one single friggin' penny. Now, what's the difference between the two? The difference between the two are things like the fact that women spend less time in the workforce. We take more career breaks. It's also things like, and what I'm focusing my life's work on, the fact that we have more credit card debt than men do, and that costs us. We don't save as much as men do, and that can cost us. We don't invest as much as men do, and that can cost us. And in fact, it cost us big time, and the gap between the two is opening wider. Because of, I would put forth to you, we have not been taken advantage historically of the power of compounding. Now, y'all all know my thing is get women to invest more, get women to be more financially stable. And not, by the way, not just because it leads to greater equality and a bigger economy and a fairer society, but because it actually solves our number one source of stress, which is money. And that taking action around money is the number one driver of our confidence in our ability to achieve our future goals. So we take the number one source of stress and we turn it around and we turn it into confidence. Now, let's just talk about how powerful compounding can be. Investing, for example. So have we built generational wealth? It's been owning real estate, which has gone up on average. It's gone up, it's gone down, it's gone up, it's gone down. But on average, over a long period of time, it's gone up 3% a year, different in different parts of the country. Investing in the stock market, gone up, it's gone down. These wrinkles right here, if you could see them in this sort of dark room, this was March, this was April, this was 2008, 2007 is the whole thing happening under my neck, which I'm glad it's dark so you can't see. But even with those ups and downs, the return that you get in the stock market historically on an annual basis about 9.6, 9.7%. How powerful is that? It is so powerful that if we all here got tonight into a time machine and went back to the year 1900 and we invested $1,000 and then we left it there to allow it to compound over time and did not touch it, and we flew back to 2020, and we'd say, boy, that was a rough, for again 120 years. Like, that was rough. I mean, there was the pandemic of 1917 and the pandemic of 2020, and there was World War I and World War II and the Vietnam War and the Korean War and the Great Depression and the crash of 29, the crash of 87 and the Great Recession and the internet bubble that burst, and we had stagflation, we had inflation, we had the subprime market crash, we had the civil rights movement. We elected a reality star as president. We elected a movie star as president. And we had the Russian ruble crisis. We had the Asian crisis. Like, wow, that was some bad stuff that happened in that. If you told me that and you'd given me the choice to invest in the stock market, I said, whoa, I don't know about that. Well, that money that you put in, the $1,000 that we went back in time and put in 1900, by the year 2020 was worth, dramatic pause to wait for it, $57 million. And that is the power of compounding, where you invest $1, you earn a return, you earn a return on the return, a return on the return, a return on the return. And what women, and in particular women of color, have been blocked out of has been from having that power of compounding, of not investing as much, not owning as much real estate, and then getting it the other way by having more credit card debt, having more student loan debt. And so that's, what I'm spending my life working on is how do we give those advantages? How do we help finance be more inclusive? How do we get that power of compounding to individuals? Now, this isn't easy. This isn't easy because we have been given messages that we're not good at this. This isn't for us. This is for the guys. And it really is sort of the last bastion of ourselves, taking the patriarchy to heart. And what I mean by that is, if I were to ask any of you tonight, and I'd say, women, are we more, how are we for money versus men? We're definitely more risk averse. Everybody, if that was a true false, it'd be true. We know that. We probably say guys are better at math than we are. We probably say they're better investors than we are. We would say that what keeps us from investing is we need more financial education. We have this sort of list of things that we've added up about, and by the way, it takes a lot of time, but all this stuff, this view we have of ourselves, none of it's true. I mean, except everybody needs more financial education, but that's all of that's true. We're not more risk averse than men are. We're more risk aware. We want to understand the risk before we take. We're not worse at math. We're as good or better. We're not worse investors. We're actually better. But society has given us these messages. And, starting in childhood today, and many of us on this call, we tell our boys, go be wealthy, be a CEO. We tell our little girls, coupon clip, be careful, watch daddy invest. Mom doesn't invest as much. When we get older, there's a lot of male money media. It's CNBC and it's Bloomberg and it's Barron's and it's Cranes. And for women, 66% of articles around money for women, we don't even have our own money station or anything, but the articles targeted us are about how hard money is, how tough it is. And those that aren't telling us how hard it is are patronizing us and telling us to take a quiz and see what our money type is. And so as a result of it today, if you say to a man the word money, what comes to his mind is power, strength, and independence. If you say the word money to a woman, what comes to mind is loneliness, isolation, and uncertainty. And men tend to think, oh, there's always more money and it's abundance. And women, we tend to think there's not that much money. And so, it wasn't so long. I was actually remembering back when I was in junior high school, where the patriarchy had told me I should be a cheerleader. I remember, because I was just unpacking some boxes recently, And I found my old cheerleading letter. And I remember it was between the volleyball team and cheerleading. I'm like, well, I think I'll get more dates if I'm a cheerleader. It's sort of cuter. And that was the patriarchy telling me that being athletic was unfeminine. Well, we still got that same thing with money. We're still today for young women, you know, they still say, oh, I'm bad with money. That's sort of a feminine characteristic. Oh, I'm not good at money. Oh, I'm better at English. Oh, you know, I'm not going to go to Wall Street. And so as a result, we don't go into the money industries, such as venture capital, such as Wall Street. We don't then get the investments because we don't have people like us looking to invest in us. And so venture capitalists invest in folks who look like themselves. And women, as a result, get 2% of venture capital dollars as CEOs, despite the fact that their companies tend to outperform because they don't, it's not the pattern match that we see. So it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but you know, you know, I would just ask that we, all of us, the influencers on this Zoom, the people who, you know, can make a difference, that we're just become very aware of how we're talking to young women and to each other around money, and begin to pull it into something that, just like now it's attractive to be athletic, it's part of being a well-rounded individual. So being good with money, so, you know, taking care of money becomes something that's part of who we are, not a let him do it. Because I will warn you, if you outsource the management of your money to your partner or spouse, the research tells you when it comes back to you, which it will, because 90% of us manage our money on our own at some point in our lives, whether we want to or not. So 80% of us die single. When it comes back to us, 74% of us have a negative surprise. And so money, you know, I've said it to this group before, money is power. We, you know, we have, on the wealth gap, have been moving backwards. The pandemic is causing us to move even further backward. But I do leave you with a little bit of good news, which is that we are, you know, I think women are ready to mobilize and march and recognize this. Recently did a survey of several thousand women, and what came out of it is 92% of women, the number one thing they all agreed with, 92%, it's clear to me we need change in our government and our companies. The second thing they agreed most on, 88% said, I believe women are being hit harder financially by the economic downturn, but more than 80% said, I've realized I need to build my own financial safety net. And so by doing that, you know, who is that good for? It's good for women. It's good for their families. The other ones it's good for are men and everybody. And so I leave you with my, once again, my you know, marching orders and our charge, which is, you know, money is power in this society, in a capitalist society. And so all of us taking care of our money, doing business with each other, asking for that raise, but then when that money comes in, looking to manage it in such a way that we have it compound and grow for us is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Sally. That was amazing. So now we're going to have some audience Q&A from Kristen, Neil, and Sandra.
Oh, Kristen, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. I was just going to say, my daughter heard Sally speak at her college and called me up and was so impressed. And you can understand why when you hear her talk about those facts and figures. So I want to go to this question for both Neil and for Sandra. I know you both grew up with the importance of financial literacy. How important it was not to just live for today and spend what you have, but save money. And that's something that, you know, as Sally was talking about, girls in particular aren't necessarily taught as well as guys.
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead, Sandra. I know that financial literacy is big, right?
It is. And, you know, I just listened to Sally and I literally was sitting here about to write her an email on LinkedIn because I'm like, she's 100% right. I have these conversations all the time, and we don't, as women, generally like to talk about finances. We don't like to talk about money deals. We don't like to talk about, you know, this investors deck that I just saw, and like, come into this deal with me, like a lot of men, and I'm sorry, but I know a lot that will get together on the golf course, they get together for dinner, and all of a sudden there's like, a company that they've invested in together. So we're just not comfortable having those conversations. And she's 100% right. And I think that comes to the confidence factor. It comes to having it be an open discussion. And it's scary, but the younger we talk about it to our daughters, to our younger generations, the better it is. It is definitely something I will say my mother was all about saving, and I have not been nearly as good as she was. In in every single pocketbook, she'd have all kinds of things that she was saving, but it was always saving for the rainy day. It's a very important conversation to have. And I think for me, it's most important to try to figure out, how do we start to have those conversations? How do we get out of our comfort zone? How do we do it as adults? How do we do it in talking to our teens about it? Because they need to be investing early. And, that's something that I think Sally is speaking to. And the more women like Sally that are out there trying to wake all of us up and shake us up and say, like, let's do this and let's do this together. I've heard several women, I've had several women around me over the past couple of years who've tried to start having those dialogues, and in small intimate groups, like, how do we now scale that? How do we make that bigger? How do we do it, in terms of minorities as well? And how do we make sure that we have access to the information and it's not scary?
Yeah, it's so true. My colleagues and I were talking. We had started sharing our salaries years ago because there was no other way to negotiate. My brother-in-law owns a business, and he said in 30 years, he has not had one woman come to him and ask him for a raise. And I always say women are not the best at negotiating because we haven't learned those skills. So Neil, what would you say? And also, just there are some companies who refuse to allow, they have contracts that don't allow people to talk about their salaries. It certainly puts you at a disadvantage as an employee.
Definitely. I think increasingly in a lot of states that's illegal now. So that's a positive. There's no question that individuals that ask for more over time get more. That's not saying that you should ask your boss every month for a raise, but to never ask it is not effective. It's also important to understand what the market rates are. So even if you don't want to leave your job, taking a call with a recruiter or applying for jobs at other companies just to understand what roles are out there and what they're being paid also puts you in a better position to negotiate and ask for salary increases and increased compensation, right? Knowledge is power, and information asymmetry puts one at a disadvantage. Absolutely.
I want to get to some of the questions we have from people who are watching. And this one is for Sandra. Your thoughts, I don't know if you saw the New York Magazine article, it was sweatpants forever. So your thought on that in terms of addressing the changes to fashion shows and seasons and overall throughout the fashion industry.
Yeah, I think the one good thing that has actually happened is that we are having honest conversations, and it's opening up. There were these discussions that just, you weren't supposed to have them, and you weren't supposed to talk about it. It was bad to have a conversation about, why are we showing wool product or shipping wool product in August when no one wants to wear that in August? It was just not a good conversation to have. And I think what that article, not just that article, but the pandemic, what that has done is that it's opening up these conversations to honest conversations about the problems and the flaws in our industry. That in that one article had a lot to say, and it was very accurate in so many different ways. The industry overall has to change, and the flaws in the system, start from the beginning of the process in terms of the calendar and product development and the supply chain all the way through the end. So, it has, I think the honest conversations that are out there, and even though it's positioning the reality of where we are in terms of store closures, or where we are in terms of bankruptcies and brands that are iconic heritage brands but aren't able to survive this pandemic or have to switch and pivot and change their business models. I mean, all that is just, it's the reality, but it's time for us to have those conversations and talk about them so that we can actually effectively make the change. There's some leaders out there, some companies that are making the changes now, but as an industry, we have to make the changes. And that, again, as I was saying, it's like goes into the calendar. And I think that's what you're going to see the most changes in, is the fact that you don't have to have and spend all this money on fashion shows 4 times a year. And you also don't want to show something that the customer sees today, but can't get it for 6 months or can't get it for 4 months. You want what you want when you want it. And so it's now become much more about seasonless fabrications and products that there's not a trend anymore that's one specific trend, or at least, not in general. There used to be, and it used to be magazines that used to dictate that. And now there's a lot of different styles, a lot of unique styles, and there's a lot of influencers that create those styles. And it's a lot of different regions around the world where you can dress one way in Australia and dress another way in New York City, So I think those are all good conversations to have right now. And it's just opening up the reality of what we have to deal with.
Thank you. All right, Neil, this one is for you. It's, with these meetings that you have online, how do you maintain eye contact? Because it's hard, you don't have that physical one-on-one. And also, how do you keep your audiences engaged? Because you have these larger meetings now. So how do you maintain that personal touch so that people really feel like you're there for them, I guess?
So the big thing is to recognize some of the major flaws of these communication channels, right? Sitting in a seat talking into a computer is unnatural, and we just need to admit to that. And to do so for 2-3 hours of a meeting like you may have had beforehand when people are physically present just doesn't work. So I would say reformat some of those meetings. Perhaps you have shorter meetings but more frequent. So if you have hour meetings and they're a little tiring, let's change that to 30 minutes on a video conference. How do we leverage some of these tools in a way that actually could be better than meeting in person? So Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist and is just a good friend, he talks about how the chat function in Zoom is just a great tool, especially for introverts who may not speak out during a typical meeting, but will put something in the chat bar. So how do we leverage these tools in different ways? The other thing is to recognize, hey, not every meeting does have to be a video conference. There's actually some research that shows that humans deduce emotion better through sound than they do through facial expression. So what meetings do you need to have in a video conference, and what can just be a traditional conference call? And then recognizing, in times of crises and in times of poor communication, you need to over communicate. So for example, I would typically do a weekly all hands. Now I'm doing an all hands meeting twice a week. So remember that this is a different environment and the old rules don't necessarily apply.
And I'll give you both a final question. It'll be the same question, but if this is from Kelly Wingo, she is the founder and strategy officer of KMW Catalyst. And she asked, if social entrepreneurship and conscious capitalism start with understanding the unique problems of your community, how are your companies defining who and what that community is? And there's a follow-up to that too. How are you determining your community's needs adequately enough so that you can address them? So we'll start with you, Sandra.
Well, first of all, one of the things that I'll just talk through what my new venture is and what I'm doing now, which is really during the middle of April, when, I think we got to the point where we thought, okay, we'll be back. It'll be 2 weeks that we're off, and then we'll come back and it'll be April. And, then April, all of a sudden we were like, wait a minute, this is going to take longer. So during that time, I realized that I was going to have to cancel our internship program. And we had some interns that we were excited about. And so I turned to the team and I said, let's create some video workshops for them, because, we could talk about the acronyms and give them knowledge and information about disciplines and functions and some of the roles and responsibilities and maybe some of the personalities that they might have, where they might see themselves fit best. And, fast forward, I realized that the more that people were losing their jobs, the more women that were needed and coming to the workforce because their husbands had lost their jobs. And I was hearing from different types of people. I realized that this was actually something that was a need for the industry in general. And that was continuing education So I've developed a platform called Fashion Launchpad, which is actually it's actually the only digital continuing education platform for fashion, retail, and beauty. And what it is it's a masterclass workshop series of classes that will be taught specifically for those industries by day-to-day operators, by CEOs, presidents, senior executives, and people who've lived through and are making business happen. And we have them separated out into 3 different areas. One is for those that are interested in the industries, whether they're high school or college and just have an interest, but don't really know much about it. So they're going to learn, like, what is a line plan? Who works on a line plan? Like, what does that mean from beginning to end? To what's a KPI? Like, just different acronyms and things, because I've canvassed a lot of people that have worked with me or for me, and seen some of the flaws that we have as an industry, which is really not about professional development and training programs that used to exist that don't exist any longer. So whether you're in the middle part of your career and you just need, you need to learn from people, you need to be taught, you need to have some continuing education, because if you're a lawyer, if you're an investment banker, if you're a doctor, if you're an electrician, you have to be up to speed on the new policies and the new laws, and you need to be able to constantly be reading and looking and learning more about processes, et cetera. And so why shouldn't we be the same? There's a lot to learn, and things change all the time, and digital marketing is one of them that changes constantly. So as we evolve and as the consumer evolves, we have to be able to teach and train and provide knowledge. And I think that that's something, while it may not be the same level of social impact that Warby Parker and Neil's team has done, it's really about helping people to take control of their own trajectory and their own journey by having and gaining knowledge from people who are doing it. And, it's great to be able to go and listen to somebody and what their career trajectory has been and be inspired by what they've done. But this is about being very, very specific about providing knowledge on and lessons on a specific topic. That'll be very short sound bites, 15-20 minute videos. And these, like I said, will be everything from what's a KPI, who's involved in a KPI, what are the milestones around, X, Y, and Z. And it'll go from interest to early in career to middle of the career, and then to senior executive and CEO levels up. So that to me is about seeing that there's been a void in our industry. We have a lot of great talent that come in, they get disgruntled. There's not a lot of training and not a lot of teaching. And I've, Neil was talking earlier about asking your customers and having them tell you what's happening. I've been asking a lot of questions, and what I found was that there's a lot of agreement with me in the industry from leaders who've seen this. And after building teams for the last 20 years, I see where there's a dearth of talent. I see where the high turnover in the industry. I see where we can do a better job of making sure that we have and that we're developing our teams and our people. So that's what Fashion Launchpad is. So that's what I'm doing.
You can sign me up for your course. I need to know how to take that. And Neil, what do you think about in terms of determining who your community is, and then how do you make sure you're advocating and meeting their needs?
Well, I think to answer the second part of the question is that you ask them, right? And you survey them. And if you're providing a service or a product, the truth is in the pudding, right? Are people using it? Are they paying for it? Is it creating the change that you want? At the end of the day, I believe that the best businesses and the best social enterprises at times are like water, in that they take the path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is, in our case, for example, just trying to push people to buy online without providing them a way to try on glasses, like our home try-on program or our virtual try-on through the Warby Parker app. If we didn't have those tools, we wouldn't have been successful. And the path of least resistance was to understand what current customer behavior is. And to build a social enterprise, right? Number one, focus. Know what problem you're trying to solve, and make sure that the solution that you have in mind actually solves that problem. And you, again, can determine that through surveys, through sales, or whatever other metric you want to use. And also understand sort of where you get leverage, right? Conscious capitalism is also about capitalism, and we can't affect change if we don't sell glasses. So if I were to focus all of my time on providing the free glasses to people in need, right, I wouldn't have the scale, the impact that I'd like to have. So you need to recognize, right, where what can help drive and give you the resources to have the impact that you seek.
Well, I've learned so much from both of you and also from Sally, so I appreciate that. And I just want to thank Ellevate Network for having these Women's Summit. And I know there's more to come, and they have just been very interesting, and I've learned a ton in the last hour. I feel like I've gotten sort of a master's education here from Sandra and Neil, so thank you all.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Sally, Kristen, Sandra, and Neil for a great session today. And thanks so much to all of you who joined the discussion. Remember, Mobilize Women will be taking place throughout the week, so mark your calendars for the rest of this week. Invite your friends, spread the word on social media using hashtag Mobilize Women, and show some love. These conversations matter more than ever before, and we want to reach as wide an audience as we can. There's strength in numbers, and we believe together we can change the world. Our next session is morning yoga and conversation featuring Jessamine Stanley, founder of the Underbelly Yoga, and Zara Barnes, executive editor of Self Magazine. And that will be taking place tomorrow, Wednesday, August 26th at 9 a.m. Eastern. And don't forget to visit the experience page, mobilizewomen2020.com, to get more insights and tools to reflect, learn, and turn today's discussion into action.